second day of our conference on countering hate speech. Please take your seats so we can start with the. We have decided to start on time and keep to the agenda. So we will really count on starting on time. My name is Lilia Dragoeva, and I'm the Executive Director of Bilitis Foundation. A few words about the foundation. This is the oldest LGBTI organization in Bulgaria. It was founded in 1994. In 2004. LGBTI, for those of you who do not know, we're going to mention this term many times today. This is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex people. This is one of the minority or marginalized or vulnerable groups in the Bulgarian society, and not only who are often, or they are very often, subject to hate speech, even on a daily basis. And not only hate speech, but sometimes words are followed by action. So this can be both positive and negative, and hate speech can turn into hate crime and attacks, assaults, even murders, just because of the fact that those people belong to a certain group. And today's discussion will focus on those vulnerable groups in our society who, for some reason, are more often than other groups subject and target of hate speech and hate crime. And I'll be pleased to moderate this discussion with 9 speakers. And I should admit that this is a challenge for me. And also it's a big honor because we've got representatives of different institutions, the civil sector, the academia, and the media. And I believe that this is the format in which we can have a meaningful discussion. In such spaces, the debates are usually between colleagues from the civil sector or experts who are engaged in legislation, or the media or the academia. Yesterday, there were representatives of many religious institutions, and I believe that this is indeed very important. All of us who are in one way or another affected by this issue, hate speech, hate crime, to be together here in this room together and share our perspective. And this is how truth can be reached. And I hope that we will manage to go one step closer to the truth. And before I give the floor to the first panelist, I will tell you a short story. On the 30th of October last year, the LGBTI Center Rainbow was attacked during an event on Saturday afternoon. It was a closed event of a group of trans people. The doorbell rang. One of the participants was very enthusiastic to open the door and welcome another member of the community. She looked through the spy hole and she saw a girl standing at the door, and without thinking any further, before she managed to make sure that it's safe to open the door, she did this. And with this girl, there was a group of 12 people, and they punched my colleague in the face, and they made havoc of the place. And I suppose you heard you've heard about this. And back then, Mr. Boyan Stankov or Boyan Rasate and his supporters had decided to break into a private office and smash everything and beat the employees. This is indicative of how words of hate and division can lead to this extreme manifestation of hate. We were talking with Associate Professor Christidi. There was a court case underway, but finally, Mr. Boyan Rasate was charged with hooliganism, and he was fined. And this was the outcome not just of a court case, but this is a sign to all people that if you break into someone's office and beat the people up there, you will get away with it. So we want to disrupt this. We want to prevent this understanding from being normalized, and we want to see how we can make our society more tolerant and more inclusive. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn the floor to Ms. Milena Kotseva, who is our first panelist, and she is the director of the procedural representation before the European Court for Human Rights. So each participant will have up to 10 minutes to make a presentation, and then we can have a discussion. So please, if you have questions, please be active. And thank you. Ms. Kotseva, you have the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, thank you for the honor to participate in this conference on hate speech. I was invited to make a presentation as an expert, as a representative of the country of Bulgaria before the ECHR, and that is why in my presentation, first of all, very briefly, I'd like to make a brief presentation of the case law of the ECHR under Article 10 of the European Convention that guarantees the freedom of expression. And I will also focus on several cases that I would think they would be interesting. Well, freedom of expression undoubtedly is the core of our modern society and one of the essential conditions for its progress and development. This role is based on the requirements for pluralism, tolerance, now, without which we cannot have a democratic society. A key principle in the case law of the ECHR is the freedom of expression. Is that freedom of expression to be interpreted broadly, and even back in 1976, there was a case, Handyside against the UK, where the court ruled that the protection under Article 10 of the Convention is the information and ideas that are seen as harmless or taken with indifference, but also there should be protection in relation to information that is insulting or shocking. In the context of the unlimited possibilities for expression in the internet. There is interesting case law of the ECHR, and there is the Convention on Human Rights is drafted in response of concrete historical events, the atrocities of the Second World War. And the purpose was to counter the threats of anti-democratic fascist regimes. That is why some information is exempt from the production. Under Article 17 of the Convention, the ECHR has adopted that denial of crimes against humanity, like the Holocaust, is one of the most serious forms of racist slander against Jews and incites hatred. And the court definitely denies, overrules any complaints against that undermine the values of the fight against racism and anti-Semitism. There are different examples of hate speech in the case law against Muslims, migrants, people of religious beliefs, war crimes, inciting violence, hatred, and many other. Well, it sounds a bit paradoxical. Because there's so many cases for which the ECHR was sought by people who were sanctioned by the national authorities for hate speech. Maybe the most blatant manifestation of hate speech are hate crimes. And this brings me to the second part of my presentation. These are the Bulgarian cases in Strasbourg. And fortunately, there are not too many. But of course, this is not indicative of the scale of the issue. I would start with the case from 2005, Nachova versus Bulgaria. It's about a murder from 1996, and the issue was murder. It was about two young people who were murdered by a military police officer who was trying to detain them. They were not armed, and the big chamber adopted that Bulgaria did not fulfill the obligation to investigate whether there were any racist motives that could have played a role in the events. Because those two young people were of Roma origin. Unfortunately, only a few months ago, the court ruled a new violation of the ban on discrimination. This is the case Stoyanova versus Bulgaria. And I guess you know the facts, but it's related to homophobic reasons for murder. And they were not taken as aggravating circumstances. Well, in 2008, 3 men attacked and beat to death a young man because they thought that he looked like a homosexual. And before that, they had attacked other people for the same reason. And they killed the victim in a especially torturing way. And the sentences they got 10 and 4 years of imprisonment. the homophobic motives were not admitted by the court as aggravating circumstances. And there was, even before the ruling, there was a draft proposal for amendments to the penal code. But this draft will be published for public debate. And there is a similar draft act in the now in Parliament. There is another interesting case related to the freedom of religion. This is the case Karaahmet versus Bulgaria, and it's about the lack of adequate measures to prevent and investigate the violation of Muslim prayers by aggressive protesters. This violated the right of Muslim followers of freedom of religion, and this should be recognized in a society based on pluralism, and the state must guarantee this right. After the authorities were informed of the protest that was planned, they could have prevented the escalation, and they could have respected the rights of both groups. From the videotapes, you could see that the police did not think about this and did not respect the rights of the groups of the Muslims and the protesters. I'm sorry, I will overrun the time allocated for my presentation, but I want to mention another interesting case. I wanted to pay special attention to a case because it's directly related to hate speech. There are two cases, Budinova and Chaprazov versus Bulgaria and Behar and Gutman versus Bulgaria from 2021, and they are related to statements by Volen Sidorov, the leader of the Attacker political party, and he spoke about people of Roma origin, Catholics, and others, Jews and others. The applicants, some of them are of Roma origin, the others are Jews. They did not were not protected. The facts are very interesting, but I will be brief. It's very important that the ECHR says that the statements made are overtly anti-Semitic, and while with the other in both statements there were stereotypes instilled. The author of those statements is a politician, so the statements must have reached a lot of people. And the court accepted that those negative statements had sufficient impact on the feeling of identity of Jews and Romans in Bulgaria. So there was a violation of Article 8 and 14 of the Convention. This is about the ban of discrimination. And finally, I wanted to sum up a court ruling that was this is Panayotova et al. Versus Bulgaria, where the court overruled the application. But if you're interested, you can read all this at the website of the Ministry of Justice. In conclusion, I believe that the key to the right behavior by the national authorities is the good knowledge and application of the case law of ECHR and the prompt reaction of legislator to bridge the legislative gaps in order to respond adequately to such negative phenomenon like hate speech.
Thanks a lot, Madam Kotseva. You gave good examples and outlined the role of the ECHR and how it links with the national law. For the non-insiders, I will mention that European institutions oftentimes feel far away, so we need to remind ourselves how they support our work and the development of Bulgarian legislation. Thanks a lot. I will not ask my questions because I want to give the floor to Mr. Sava Petrov for his speech. He's a prosecutor with the Supreme Prosecutor's Office of Cassation. You have 10 minutes. Organizers, esteemed guests, colleagues, dear concerned friends and professionals, yesterday we heard a lot of inspiring words and valuable information on this valuable, important topic. This makes it easy for me because I will refer to what was mentioned yesterday. I have my 10 minutes. I hope to have 15, but they will not be. And in this technical part of the conference, I'll tell you about the measures taken at the institutional level in order to recognize, persecute, and penalize discrimination. Let me start by saying that I will refer to the thesis made yesterday. Hate crimes and hate speech are not the same, although they're related. Hate speech can have individual penal significance, but is often not persecuted in such reasons that were mentioned yesterday by Mr. Hartman and Mr. Šketa. However, hate crimes should always be persecuted and penalized. The link between the two can be looked through asking for the dominating concept. It includes two components. One of them is trivial crime made on purpose and motivation, bias motivation. And not necessarily this specific motive to be in a separate part of crime, but hate speech can be an indicator. They can be linked to a protected characteristic, which apart from creating the environment in which hate crimes live, give us a criteria to recognize it. These are linked issues, and there is a necessity to have an active, foreseeable policy. And the prosecutor's office is focusing on this for a long time. It has been a priority for a long time. I would like to give you some examples based on my subjective work for 10, 15 years, covering the mandates of 3 prosecutors general. There are just a few examples. The first one is a reaction of the Prosecutor General with regard to the Katunica event in 2011. In 2013, we made an ambitious criminological survey which was published, and there was an interesting act, a typical example of soft law, which is a combination of a good read and methodology. It is nice. I encourage you to read it again, you who are the prosecutors here, because it doesn't create a firm commitment, but rather to raise your awareness and literacy. And the training program of the Prosecutor's Office of Bulgaria between 2014 to 2022, it has been there as a topic. So we have always strived to increase the qualification of prosecutors in this regard. This is why I want to underline what you said at the bottom. There was a project with the Bureau for Democratic Initiatives and Human Rights of the OSCE, which ended with a good outcome. There is a handbook. I tried to copy at least the first slide, but I couldn't. So whoever is interested, I could give him this material in PDF. Let us see why this topic continues to be a priority. Because we have a wide scope. There is a lot more to do. This is the assessment of the prosecutor's office. But we also get critical glances from outside. Some of them can be determined as a bit too aggressive for our taste. For example, the report from 2015 of Amnesty International. Others are more conservative and authoritative, like the practice of the ECHR that Milena mentioned, the recommendations on the CVM from 2017. But what's more important is that we also auto-refer to this recognitions. There are two reports of the prosecutor's office which study the case law of the ECHR. We need to provide efficient prosecution, although this is not the only topic. Crimes with a discrimination motive has always been there. We should look for adequate penalization. We have one of the co-authors of this report, which is an important read. It is accessible from the website of the prosecutor's office. Let us see now what lessons we have learned from our experience. The first one, and Lily, our moderator, mentioned this, is that hate crime is a crime giving a message. It gives a message not only to the victim, but also to all carriers of the protected characteristic, be they sexual orientation, religion, or other, as long as this is a protected characteristics. And this is why the institutional reaction is also a message. And if it is missing or insufficient, then this is a message of inadequacy of protection against the whole group, which is of the same protected characteristic. And so, taking into account the characteristics of the case law of the ECHR with regard to the object of study and sensitivity of the motive, our main task is to make the colleagues not more literate, they're sufficiently literate, but more sensitive to what can make an action hate crime. And we need to study the concrete context. Stone can be just breaking something, but when this building is a temple, if it is 20th of April, if this building is used by LGBT community organization, then the message is different. And if it is different, we need to treat it and persecute it in a different way, in a way which sets higher goals, in which we don't satisfy with the trivial factors determining what needs to be proven, but we're looking for the discrimination motive. We set it apart and persecute it. Furthermore, a lesson learned is the necessity to make what is happening popular. Crime cannot be overcome if there is no system of measuring it. For this reason, the need to set apart and follow up on such cases is especially important. I have news for you at the second part. It addressed the administrative leaders like our moderator and friend Vladimir Nikolov. In the spring of this year, we adapted the information and reporting system of the Bulgarian Prosecutor's Office. I was trained on this only yesterday. with the help of Nikolai Georgiev, my friend. But now we have an adapted instruction for this activity, and we have new forms for statistical reporting focusing on hate crime. And they have an indicative list of indicators to do with protected characteristic, much richer than those offered in the penal code. You will see what our penal code is usually criticized for: homophobic motives, selection of the victim on the criterion of disability, for example. Everything has been grouped in several sections and allows our internal system to be better used for following up on such cases. Furthermore, if one system is adequately fed with data, then true, it may take years or months afterwards, but it will allow data to be taken from this and to prioritize, including with the special supervision measures. Furthermore, the topic continues to be a training highlight in the program for training magistrates and prosecutors. There is a program of the National Institute of Justice. When I saw the reaction of those who apply for such training, I will say that the National Institute of Justice is organizing and organized yesterday a successful training. Your internal program, in your internal program, the topic lagged behind because of the COVID and the change of the training format, but I hope that forums like today's will allow it to bring it higher in the list of priorities. And a few words in the end about the important issues. What are the remaining important issues? About the adequacy of legislation, I will even not mention it because it's under the prerogatives of another power. But it's better to turn to the second issue. Can we achieve better results given the current criminal law? There is an answer, and it is yes, if we are consistent in standing by priority and not having new priorities to suffocate old priorities. As long as we have good methodology and high qualification, as long as we have increased sensitivity towards this matter and maintain useful partnership. The last one is very important because hate crimes affect a lot of people with the common protected characteristics, and we need authentic speakers who express the positions, pains, and suffering of the potential endangered groups. And conferences like today's can be used as an occasion to strengthen our triad in all its part, and to have more consistency, more commitment in standing by the priorities, and having better understanding of what hate crime is, and having better and more useful partnerships, not only institutional but also non-institutional. Of course, every success is up to the capacity of the people working in the institutions and their partners to dedicate themselves to the issues. And I believe that after these 2 days, we are especially encouraged to do it in the future. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for speaking more than the allocated time. Thank you to Mr. Petrov. You outlined several very important elements for the success of our joint cause for protecting the rights of minorities, fighting hate speech and hate crime. I want to ask a question to Madam Kotseva and to you, Mr. Petrov, about the role of education and training. Later on, we will hear speeches on part of representatives of the academia, but I would like to ask you, as people who are in the institutions now and see the system from within, what is the role of education and training in the curriculum and the preparation of the future lawyers in the system of higher education to produce experts, specialists who are sensitive enough and have good qualification and are committed to follow priorities continuously? Thank you for this question. The topic about the more specific way human rights are lectured at in the faculties of law in universities is very important. We're very sensitive to this topic, and for a long time we have seen there is a deficit and there is a gap in the knowledge on this matter. We are monitoring the process, but we are also trying to help fill the gap. So I can brag that with our modest participation, we managed, along with our colleagues, to change the ordinance on the minimal requirements for law to include human rights. And this was something on occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Convention. This was a long-awaited and rather late step forward. As we like to say, we are not only agents of the state in Strasbourg, but agents under the conventions. For this reason, we are trying to support this process through expertise. We have even dedicated a whole project to this objective. So I believe we are moving in the right direction with a certain delay, true, but the results will soon be there. So we have news here. For me, this is news. I'm not a lawyer myself, but this is something very important. This should be there as a subject, just as hate speech and hate crimes send a message to a given community. With the existence of this subject in the curriculum, we are sending a positive message that as a society we want to work for protecting human rights. Mr. Petrov, what is the role of education and training from your point of view? Briefly, some time ago I was believed to be a specialist in this field, so this is a very specialized topic for magistrates, law enforcement agents. Regarding university education, I don't know a lot, but I believe that it should be intertwined in the education of human rights training, which is becoming ever more autonomous. But I have something else to say. Prosecutors are human. Regional prosecutors' office have activities involving them in the training of children. I believe that when we speak about hate crime, tolerance, and avoiding discrimination, not turning a discrimination motive into criminal behavior, we should start early. And this is a matter which does not presuppose highly qualified knowledge of law, but a matter of mentality which is built from a very early age. I believe that prosecutors can positively contribute to this, and I know of such examples.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koltseva, Mr. Petrov, for your statements, presentations, and I know that you have other things to do, so thank you very much. Please take your seats in the audience, and now I would like to invite on stage the next panelists. We have with us Mr. Radoslav Stoyanov, who is an expert from the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee, and Mr. Dejan Kolev, who is the chair of the Inter-Ethnic Dialogue and Tolerance Center, and Miss Yulia Dandalova, who is the CEO of the Shalom Jewish organization in Bulgaria. So these are practitioners, representatives of 3 different minority and vulnerable groups that are often the target of hate speech. So I'll give you the floor for presentations, and then I hope we can have a discussion. And now, Mr. Stoyanov, over to you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to apologize. I plan to speak in English, but I can see that most of you do not have receivers for interpretation, so I will speak in Bulgarian. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm representing the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee. This is the oldest and largest Bulgarian organization for human rights. We involved in monitoring of human rights in Bulgaria and also protection through strategic cases. And we provide legal aid for victims of violation of fundamental human rights. And these victims include hate speech, hate crimes, victims. I myself am representing the LGBTI community. I'm gay, so I'm very happy to speak before you on this issue. I will focus on several issues that we have identified to protect victims of such crimes. All hate crimes are distinct from other crimes by their discriminatory component. This means selection of the victim based on some property, some feature that we can expect that it can be removed as a reason of aggression. It can be used as a reason for aggression. This is gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, and so on, religious beliefs. So in the case of hate crime, the perpetrator targets the victim for 2 reasons. First, his or her attitude to the group to which the victim belongs. This is what usually happens when it comes to hate crimes. The other main reason for targeting a victim is to exploit a vulnerability related to the property, like early age or old age. For example, the perpetrator may have exploited the fact that the victim is helpless compared to a younger, healthier person. Another reason, this is when there is the physical space, like religious temple, as Lily said at the beginning, a community center for LGBTI communities or Roma communities or Jewish communities, when they get together to socialize and hold events. So what are the key issues that we managed to identify in our attempts to protect victims of hate crime? First of all, and this was already mentioned many times, this is legislation. You know that now the penal code, in the penal code, race, ethnicity, and religion, these are the only properties that are recognized as qualifying features. There are many other features that are in the Constitution, like sexual orientation, and this was mentioned in the when referring to the case Stoyanova versus Bulgaria, gender identity, the gender itself, age, disability, and religion, with the exemption of Articles 164, 66, where some this is a serious issue, but even when there is legislation, we have identified the problem, and this is the understanding that the discrimination motive should be unveiled. As mentioned, the Stoyanov versus Bulgaria case is about the student Mikhail Stoyanov, who in 2008 was killed because the perpetrators thought that he was gay. The prosecutor's office tried to include the discrimination motive and press charges for hooliganism, and but the court did not accept this. It admitted the homophobic motives for aggravating circumstances, but did not accept the hooliganism. And then the court ruled that there are no aggravating circumstances, and then this was then the ECHR found that the lack of a legal framework was one of the reasons for this ruling. And another thing that I'm trying to formulate, this is the legal qualification of the act which can conceal the discriminatory motive. The ECHR has ruled many times that hate crime involve the unmasking of the discriminatory motive. It's we have to qualify the act in such a way that shows what the victim has experienced. And the justification that the perpetrators gave to the police was, we are trying to cleanse the park from gay people. So even when legislation is in place, we have the issue of unmasking of the discriminatory motive in cases where we've got victims that are different in color or different ethnic background. We can see those problems in many cases. Instead of xenophobic motives, racist motives, we've got hooliganism. When the victims are of Roma origin, very often for sometimes it's xenophobic. It says xenophobic reasons, not racist. But the Romas, they're not. They're Bulgarian citizens. So xenophobic does not apply. The unmasking of the property is a very important element. And the last thing, even when we have legislation in place, when we have the right qualification, then the facts should be recognized as facts of discrimination. And here, I don't know how much time I have left. Well, in a minute and a half, it's difficult to explain all this, but one of the most serious issues that I've encountered in my attempts to explain what is hate crime, these are the so-called sexist violence. It's strange because we take misogynism as something normal in our society. But when we have domestic violence, very often we have misogynism involved. I will tell you now a couple of facts. Men are predominantly the perpetrators of violence against other men. Men are predominantly the perpetrators of violence against women. What is true in most cases is not true in all cases, but it is true in most cases. The formal reasons for such violence is usually presented in other form, like jealousy, or some row family, row over bills or children, or alcohol consumption, other addictions. The access of men to women's bodies, sexual violence. So we do not recognize those things as sexism, as an attempt to control women. And this is the biggest challenge that I've encountered in my attempts to explain why this violence is also hate crime. From provocative makeup to wearing hijab, from being sexually active to being spinster deprived of sex. I'm quoting, from losing one's job due to pregnancy to ban abortion altogether. The autonomy on what women can do with their bodies is limited and regulated in a way that no man's autonomy over their body is ever controlled. We have to understand all this as we understand the mechanisms behind racism and homophobia, to understand hate crimes. And I will now make a reference to education. This is the key to the solution to the problems, because criminal law is involved at a later stage when we already have a crime. So we need to really include education, because sometimes we don't think that jealousy is in fact another word for sexism and control. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to Radoslav Stoyanov from the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee for talking about domestic violence and violence against women, which is a very current topic in Bulgarian society, and unfortunately we see as one of the topics which sparks flames, and we hope that steps in this direction are taken for reducing these incidents. I have questions to Mr. Stoyanov, but before that I'll give the floor to Mr. Dejan Kolev from Amalipe and to Yulia Dandova from Shalom in order to pose questions afterwards to start a conversation. So now, Mr. Dejan Kolev, you have 10 minutes. Thank you. I'm a philosopher by education and by spirit. We philosophers have an issue with keeping time. I'll ask you to give me a sign 2 minutes before my time is up. I'm a chair of a center for Amalipe. This is a Center for Dialogue and Tolerance. It means friendship in the Roma language. We're working for the integration of the Roma community with 300 schools in Bulgaria, over 250 training mediators, and as a part of our activity, very often we run across the problem of hate speech and hate crimes, because young educated Roma, who are more and more, continue to run into the problem of rejection and hate. I would like to congratulate the colleagues from the Bulgarian Prosecutor's Office for the initiative to organize this conference, Stop Hate Speech, and I hope that this is an initiative which will spread to other countries as well. We have grounds to start this initiative from Bulgaria, and precisely with what was mentioned yesterday, things which were mentioned with regard to the Holocaust and the fact that in Bulgaria we avoided the Holocaust. From the time of Sartre, we know that we often see what is missing, and what was missing yesterday, with all the inspiring speeches that I heard, we didn't mention the important topic that Holocaust, apart from being directed against Jews, the other group which suffered was Roma. Close to 500,000 Roma were killed during the Holocaust. There is a special Roma word, Poraimus, which refers to the Roma Holocaust. The 2nd of August has been recognized as a day recognized by the European Commission and the European Parliament for a day on the Roma Holocaust, and in November 2020 the International Alliance for Remembrance of Holocaust adopted a definition of anti-Gypsyism, the anti-Roma discrimination. And it shows that the anti-Semitism and anti-Gypsyism are equally demonstrations of xenophobia and something to fight. I made a graph inspired by the things mentioned yesterday about the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a product of a triangle of hate. At the top are the politicians of hate. I don't want to mention their names, but the cadets, the sides are hate speech, what we're talking about here, and the other side is the discriminatory practices and discriminatory legislation, which started in the 1930s in Germany and other countries, but the basis of this triangle of hate was, the basis is the social distance, hatred, indifference of large groups of the population with regard to Jews and Roma, against whom there was the Holocaust. I have also quoted the ambassador of the Third Reich in Bulgaria, which is the best compliment for Bulgarians of the 1940s. And having grown up with Armenians, Greek and Gypsies, Bulgarians didn't find the flaws in the Jews. And with regard to what the Vice President mentioned, the comparisons between Germany and Bulgaria, I was posing the question, how about now? What if today we would have to face such a challenge? Would the social distance and indifference and sometimes hate against the Roma, would they not stop to have a repeat of this feat to stop the Holocaust against the Roma? Some words about the trends in the social distance. This is a term in social science which means the readiness to contact a given group. In Bulgaria, social distances were researched by Open Society Institute through annual surveys. They will check, do you agree to live in the same city with a given group or to live in the same neighborhood with a given group? In 2007-2012, there was an improvement in social distance. We were happy to see this improvement, and we were telling ourselves, yes, after acceding to the EU, we are becoming Europeans. However, afterwards, from 2013 to 2018, when the last survey was, there was a sharp decline in the social distance, which annihilated the improvement, and in 2018 we were at lower levels than before. Acceding to the Roma in Bulgaria was set apart as the worst desired, the most segregated community against the others, like Turks, and against new minorities like Arab, Chinese, and so on, because the survey of Open Society asked questions about these minorities as well. You see a graph showing how through the years the social distances were increasing and decreasing. The graph against the Roma is at the bottom. We asked ourselves, why did we have this decline in the parameters? I used data by Associate Professor Alexei Pamporov from the Sociology Institute with the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. He asked whether this was not related to hate speech of political leaders which went unsanctioned by the major institutions. And you could see some speeches by Minister Moskov, by Valery Semyonov, Dzhambazki, and the like politicians. Next slide. From 2014, we were witnessing sharp anti-Roma statements from well-known politicians, and the institutions which are supposed to protect people's rights didn't react. The Ombudsman, the Committee Against Discrimination, and the Prosecutor's Office, they were silent, and often they said there was freedom of expression of politicians. And just brief examples from the parliament. Valery Semyonov called Roma, of course he used the word gypsies, human like people who are very rude, and with regard to Roma women, they had that they were like stray female dogs. And the Committee for Protection of Discrimination didn't file a case. Roma activists also wanted to file a case, but the Prosecutor's Office and the Ombudsman didn't start working on this. There was a trial by Roma activists. At the first instance, the court in Burgas convicted Semyonov, but then Valery Semyonov was he was acquitted. And yesterday I heard Dr. Haji, the Chief Mufti, say in an understandable language, my rights end when I start affecting the other people's rights. And Elena Punova said something similar. Freedom of speech cannot be a reason not to sanction hate speech. In addition, in 2017, Valery Semyonov was chosen as Deputy Prime Minister, responsible for the National Council on Cooperation with Integration issues. This is scandalous in itself. Several Roma organizations, we gathered 12,000 signatures against this appointment. There was no result from this. Another example, in January 2019, Deputy Prime Minister Karakochanov said the gypsies in Bulgaria are very impudent, and he wrote an anti-Roma concept months later, and he insisted that it is adopted by the Council of Ministers. Ultimately, it wasn't. No leading politician at his time said this was a wrong idea. Thank God the Council of Ministers didn't adopt it, but didn't publicly refute it. And I'm going to finish with some short recommendations. We need a targeted and activity of the Prosecutor's Office, of the Ombudsman and the Commission Against Discrimination in all cases of anti-Semitism and anti-Roma discrimination. Freedom of speech is not an excuse. We need special attention to be paid to the hate speech of leading politicians. This hate speech feeds social distances against the Roma, and we need a common fight against the form of anti-Semitism, anti-Roma discrimination. We need to organize tolerance campaigns together in school and outside of school, because we are together colleagues, and together we need to continue this fight, not to allow to have a repeat of the events of the middle of the 20th century. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kolev. What you said was very important, and this thin difference, or maybe not so thin, we are conveniently moving the border between freedom of speech and hate speech. So this border is often transgressed, and we often say that hate speech is freedom of expression. I fully agree that we are together and that we need to be together, and I'm glad that we heard the speeches at the sequence that it was. So I give the floor to Madam Yulia Dandova from Shalom, and we LGBTI and Glass Foundations work actively with her.
Thank you. Before I start, I'd like to thank the Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Bulgaria for the courage to organize this event, because speaking about hate speech at a time when hate speech is becoming something normal is very difficult. Speaking about hate speech after 2 years of a pandemic, in a time of war, people may ask, well, is this a topical issue at the backdrop of all other problems we've got? Last time we were together, I think, and the only time we were together with LGBT community and Bulgarian Helsinki committee was, well, those times where there were events organized by us, and that's why I'm very impressed with this event. As a representative of Shalom, this is the organization of Bulgarian Jews, I had prepared an official address to you, but Mr. Sava Petrov actually implied, without being aware of that, that I'd better not read it out, because when we talk about hate speech, we should not be talking about dry statistics. Thank you, Mr. Petrov. There was so much honesty in your statement that I really believe that this is your mission. And I'm a Bulgarian Jew born in 1978. My mom is Jewish. My dad is Christian. I cannot even say my mother is Jewish, my father is Bulgarian, because both my parents are Bulgarian. And I'm here standing before you as a mother of a daughter, 12-year-old, Emma. And on Sunday, we decorated the Christmas tree and the decoration for Hanukkah. I'm standing before you as a woman who believes that I'm responsible for the upbringing of my children. And what I'm concerned with is not whether prosecutors will develop sensitivity. Well, this will probably happen, not that whether the judges will learn all the legislation. They will perhaps do this. I believe in institutions. But what I'm afraid of is, what I'm not sure of is whether I, as a mother, can develop the sensitivity in my own child. And I'm concerned about anti-Semitism. It is alarming, but I'm alarmed and I'm concerned with violence at school, because the universities do a great job, I guess. We have matriculation exams, and we're concerned that children get lower grades. But what I'm concerned with is what the results are in our tests in humanity. So are we sensitive enough to other people? I made a family experiment, and it's very selfish to be before you here and talk about myself instead of talking about what Shalom is doing. But you will use this occasion. I, as a parent, created the rule. Well, 5 lever fine if you use the word hate. And now, in 1 year, we collected 780 lever. And it turns out that I use the word hate so often that I even fail to hear it. I use it when I drive, when I walk the street, when I watch the TV, and for us adults, maybe this does not matter, but children can hear this, and that's why I'm very grateful that there are events like this, and I want to call upon you to try and show our many identities while being here, because we all have many identities: activists, professionals, spouses, brothers, sisters, people walking in the street. And I'm deeply convinced that if we have consistent behavior with all those identities and intolerance to hate speech, we will succeed. Because when we talk about anti-Semitism, and it's important to say a few words about this. Well, there is anti-Semitism in Bulgaria today. We cannot hide this. Well, of course, not at the level, the monstrous level like in Europe. It's on a much lower level, and I still believe in that there is truth in those words, that we are taught to live together. But hate speech is very loud. And what I want to call upon you, and thank again everyone, to call upon you to work together and be intolerant to hate speech. Yes, there's a lot of statistics. We've sent letters, complaints. We received strange answers, like when the 2 young men urinated in front of the synagogue and painted a swastika. Well, the explanation from the authorities was that they were just relieving themselves. But I'm here not to tell you this. I'm here as a person who wants to have a society that does not tolerate hate speech. Well, yeah, unfortunately, now, for the first time, a parliamentary represented political party has an official declaration against Shalom. They're accusing us of anti-Bulgarian policy. I guess this will continue because we heard that this is a trend. But I truly hope that those words will not go unnoticed, and there will be a sharp response by the institutions to this statement. Lily said that we work with the LGBTI community. We work also with the Roma. We work with the Roma communities, and we signed an agreement for cooperation. And of course, some people were scandalized. We had questions asked like, we've got enough issues on our plate. Well, do you need other issues, the issues of LGBTI people as well? And they were asked the same questions. But it's important to say, and I will close because I did not follow my time, but those who march every February with torches, they, like 1,500, 3,000 people, the so-called Lukov March. Why I call it the so-called? Because it doesn't matter who is the hero they venerate. I don't want to go into historical discussions on who General Lukov was, but even they might say Little Red Riding Hood March, but it's clear what they want to spread: hate, hatred, and fear. And I'm happy that every efforts are being made for 2 years now with the participation of the prosecutor's office. Well, this march has been suspended, and we will continue to try and stop it. Well, the march is organized in a very smart way, so there are no symbols that are banned by law, but they're trying to paint an image of Bulgaria that it does not have, and we will continue trying to prevent this. Thank you for your assistance to prevent this march. So thank you again, and I'll be available for questions, and have a nice day. Thank you very much, Ms. Dandolova. Yes, you can ask questions to our participants. There is a microphone over there, but I've got a quick question to the three of you. Now, we have outlined the situation of the legislation, as Mr. Stoyanov said. So, are the rights of vulnerable people protected? LGBTI people do not have legal protection, but from the statements of the speakers, we heard about the crossing points between the experiences of LGBTI people, women victims of violence, Jewish representatives, and it seems that they overlap, and the lack of sensitivity in our society is similar. We could see the social distance that is getting larger, contrary to what we are hoping for, convergence. So I would like to ask a more provocative question. If you were to choose one thing of all the recommendations that you could, if you had a magic wand and you could change, which would you change in order to improve the situation for the groups we are talking about? We'll start with Mr. Stoyanov. Education. This would change things, because the knowledge about differences in society, the understanding and sensitivity, this is something that can prevent, even if there's no law in place, this can prevent hate speech. You can get the law tattooed on your forehead, but this will not help you if you do not identify hate and discrimination. Thank you very much, Mr. Kolev. I support Radoslav. I agree that education has to change. But even back from Socrates, we know that educated people are not always good. But what I would do with a magic wand would be to make all people smile. But this is what the president of the World Jewish, the European Association said, because the hate is the result of the lack of happiness. These are people who don't believe in themselves. So if we can really smile, we will stop hating each other. Thank you, Mr. Kolev. Ms. Dandolova. Well, I would give a selfish answer, and if I had a magic wand, I would I would invite all people to the synagogue. Those people who had never seen Jews in their life. I want them to meet Jews. So I would do this with a magic wand. So I want to show who we are. Well, the synagogue is not very friendly because there's high fences, doors, thick doors. But this is something that we cannot help, but we've got it. But I want to show other people who you are. We are just ordinary people who have fun. But it's not an Orthodox church; it's a synagogue. Can I also add something? Kant said. Well, I will not quote him, but it's like, do the other people what you want other people to do to you. When you have, if Bojan Rasacek goes to your, breaks into your office and he's charged with hooliganism, at the same time we are not happy that in North Macedonia, anti-Bulgarian speech is taken as freedom of expression. So we have to do to other people what we want other people to do to us, and then we will get things fixed. So thank you, Mr. Kolev. Knowledge is indeed very important, getting to know each other. So we always invite our opponents, other people, to come and meet us at our events. At Sofia Pride, it's just a colorful protest. It's music, it's full of color and music. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite on stage our third round of panelists. Professor Vili Lilkov, Ms. Marisa Roth, and Associate Professor Eva Pushkarova. Please take your seats on stage, and then you can make your presentations. And meanwhile, I would say that if I had a magic wand, what would I do? I would introduce critical thinking in the minds of each one of us. I think this is very important. So thank you very much. And now I'm very pleased to turn the floor to Professor Vili Lilkov for a presentation. You've got 10 minutes, and I'll give you a sign 1 minute before the end.
Уважаеми господин главен прокурор.
Mr. Prosecutor General, organizers, participants, guests, allow me to thank you for being invited to this forum. For me, this is a very high honor. And when I was proposed to participate, I decided, because I'm not a lawyer, to bring you back to history, because we see the lessons in history. Some of them are lessons learned, others not yet learned. I'm going to bring you back to the Second World War, when Europe was a continent with a lot of hate and barbarianism. Something unique happened. The Bulgarian elite saved its Jews. No Bulgarian Jew from within the borders of the Kingdom of Bulgaria ended up in the camps of death. And I chose as an example the behavior of one group. These are the Bulgarian members of the Rotary Club, which fell under the law for protection of the nation. Share 1 had to do with the members of the Rotary, Mason organizations, the Bulgarian Pen Club, which were outlawed. And then the members of the Rotary Club, although they didn't have any clubs and property, they defended Bulgarian Jews, which were hit under Chapter 2 of the Act for Defense of the Nation. And then these dignified people took the fate of the Bulgarian Jews for them and did everything possible to help them. In the 1930s in Germany, they thought the Rotary clubs were attacking the front lines of the Jews. Goebbels wrote in his diary, "We shouldn't stand this international gang, which most often is under Jewish influence." On the 24th of June 1937, the Internal Minister of Germany ordered all state employees to leave Rotary clubs. On the 23rd of August 1937. In Völkischer Beobachter newspaper, there was an article saying that if you are a member of the Rotary Club, this is something unacceptable for the members of the National Socialist Party. Walter Buch, 2 days later, the Arbeiter of the Bulgarian Socialist Party on racial issues, mentioned that above all, a Rotary Club member is not anti-Semitic, and this is a reason for Rotary clubs to be liquidated in Germany. What happened in Bulgaria? At the same time, leading Bulgarian Rotary Club members stood up for defense of Jews in Germany as a protest against the Nazi policy of Germany. In 1937, academician Metody Popov returned the orders given to him. Then he was given he was called Jewish proxy. The first secretary of the Bulgarian legacy, and Dr. Smedovsky, provided Bulgarian passports to German Jews so that they could leave Germany. He was announced persona non grata and was expelled from the country. In 1938, at the conference of professors of natural sciences in Bulgaria, the Rotary Club member academician Metody Popov, at that time professor, spoke against racial theories, and he was accused for this. Who wrote against him? But in every issue of the Rotary Club magazine in Bulgaria, there were articles on solidarity and against speaking against other people just because they're different. Professor Ruben Boshkov also talked about the topic of support for interracial and inter-religion tolerance. In Share 1 of the Act for Protection of the Nation, Bulgarian Pen Club and Rotary organizations and others were announced as undermining the state, and they were liquidated in 41. Peter Gabrovsky was himself a Rotary Club member, but was expelled from Rotary, whether because he did not pay his membership fee or other reason. Rotary Club members thought he could not remain within their ranks, and he tabled this law. Nikolaev said this was a stupid act and resigned as a chair of the Commission on Internal Affairs in the Parliament later. He, together with Filip Makhmudiv and Nikola Vasilyev, other Rotary Club members and members of Parliament in the 25th Parliament, signed the letter of Dimitar Peshev for saving the Bulgarian Jews. With the debates on this future bill, Makhmudiv and Vasilyev said they were against this act and wanted to limit the most anti-Semitic provisions. Nikolai Vasilyev provided transition visas to some Jewish companies from Romania, and 3 members of parliament signed under Dimitar Peshev's letter. And something very important, they didn't succumb to the pressure that Bogdan Filov was exerting on them to withdraw their signatures. The Rotary Club member Dimitar Burov, manager of a factory in Russia, sheltered Jewish families and helped them go to Palestine. Furthermore, in August 40, when Penchu ship with over 550 Jews was stopped between Russa and Gyurgio, and when all of these people were in a bad situation, they were starving for weeks, Dimitar Burov, from the member of the Rotary Club, together with the grandchild of Baba Tonka and Metropolitan Rusevsky, they organized a humanitarian action, providing them with food and water. There were 550 Jews who started from Bratislava and reached Palestine in 2 years, but this is another interesting story. Georgi Pachevarov from Russia, also a Rotary Club member, hired at his enterprise Jews, even at managerial positions. Ivan Balabanov, chair of the Union of Industrialists in Bulgaria, and Rotary member and a sponsor, led to his factory in Kucherino 25 Jewish girls, saving them from hunger. He would gather all the employees and he asked them to treat these girls with respect. In these severe years, in this factory in Kocherino, there were workers working from 14 different nationalities, from Yugoslavia, Russia, Ukraine, under the wing of the chair of the Union of Industrialists. He was death sentenced after the 9th of September 44, probably from 78, I don't know. Another Rotary member from Plovdiv signed a letter also signed by Georgi Kristev. The mayor of Burgas, Rotary Club member Dianko Prvchev, was among the initiators of the appeal of the mayors against the deportation of Jews, and was in the delegation which visited the National Assembly and the Council of Ministers to insist for repealing the decision for deportation. The Rotary Club member from Burgas, pharmacist Berezhikov, hired a Jewish person, and not only one, in his pharmacies. Rotary Club members Proshik and Vajichka supported organizationally and financially a channel for moving Czech Jews through Bulgaria to the Middle East through one of the Rotary Club member Cvetko Kadiski. The decision for creating this smuggling channel was taken in Athens in 39. In 42, this smuggling route ceased to exist because the organizer, young Zygmunt Czech, who was the owner of the company, mother company, servicing Cvetko Kadiski company, with a Czech Rotary Club member, was killed by Gestapo. After the 9th of September 44, Rotary clubs were announced as fascists and their activity never recovered. It was recovered in 1990 at the initiative of Kaučukhinov, who in 2019 received the award for tolerance of Shimon Peres Center for Peace for his Rotary activity for peace and tolerance in the world. At the initiative of the Rotary clubs in Haifa, in Israel, in 2006, one of the central squares was called Bulgaria, and there was a memorial on occasion of saving the Bulgarian Jews. At the initiative of Rotary Club Sofia, Dmitry Beshev's home in Kyustendil was announced of national significance, and Rotary Club members left copies of documents and reproductions of works of art to do with Dmitry Beshev and the other club members. This is just history from the years of the Second World War. I chose it because it is indicative for several things. Firstly, it is not well known. Secondly, it shows how leaders should act in a hard situation, because everybody says, where is the prosecutor's office, where is the court? If we only rely on courts and prosecutors to solve our hate speech and hate crimes problems, we have a problem, because before the prosecutors and courts, it's society, media, and leaders. Bulgarian Rotary Club members showed they were true leaders. They placed themselves in front of hate, even with danger for themselves, and this is grounds for Jews to remember what happened in Bulgaria. And in conclusion, I will remind you the words of Emmanuel Zisman, ambassador of the State of Israel in Bulgaria, who, when this renovated house of Dmitry Beshev was reopened, said, "Today Bulgaria is exceeding for EU membership. This is why it should fulfill certain requirements, but if the requirement was humanity, then not Bulgaria, but Europe should apply for membership." So these words should be remembered. So he said, tell these words to your children. I would like to thank Professor Lilko for the lessons of history and for the role of leaders. It seems our societies have been through a lot of crises, and the crisis of leadership is one of them. It is a major one. I will hold back on my questions, but because I want to give the floor to Marisa Roth, who won the Pulitzer Award. She is a member of the Royal Geographic Society. She has the floor for a speech on the role of journalists and the media in what we're talking about. You have the floor.
I would like to thank Prosecutor General Geshev and Yakov Geresi for inviting me to participate in this extremely important conference. I'm very, very honored to be here. If I were asked to define myself, I would say that I'm a peace photographer, not a war photographer. Growing up in California in the shadow of the Vietnam War, born to parents who wisely and courageously came to America in October 1938, during the closing window of time before the onset of World War II, the theme of war was always both in the background and in the foreground. On my father's side, I am the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of Holocaust victims killed in Novi Sad, Yugoslavia, during a 3-day massacre in January 1942. On my mother's side, My grandparents were sheltered and saved in Budapest, Hungary by Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat and humanitarian. War has defined my work as a photojournalist and documentary photographer for almost 4 decades, propelling me to face the tragic and complex consequences and aftermath that it inevitably brings. I'm not sure whether I took on the resulting project entitled One Person Crying, Women and War, or if it took me on, but I was relentlessly compelled to meet women from around the world who experienced conflict firsthand as illuminating what I felt was an underreported perspective. Over the course of this odyssey, I interviewed and photographed hundreds of women and the decimation not just of their lives and the land on which they lived, but also the remnants of their ripped-apart cultures and the far-reaching sorrows for loved ones directly touched by war. These women belied their heartache with resilience, gracefully rejected revenge, embraced activism, took on post-war roles that they could have never imagined beforehand, and often bestowed unexpected kindness and generosity. In addition to images, I think deeply about words. When I read them, when I hear them, and when I write them, as they are the foundation for communication. I believe that women who have lived through conflict face a choice as to how they see themselves, as victims, as survivor, or as both. I've chosen to refer to the women featured in One Person Crying as survivors, as they carried on against almost insurmountable challenges and chose life despite the traumas and heartbreak, the seen and unseen wounds, and also knowing too much about death. Since perception can change with a single word, I know that these women would not want to be seen as victims, to be pitied or diminished in any way that counters their profound abilities to maintain hope and to keep walking into the future step by step, regardless of how difficult their journeys have been. These two perspectives offer an example of how we choose to see others and what meaning we place on our observations, and how they see themselves, which, in my opinion, is the more important aspect, as it supports reciprocity and respect. In thinking about the complexity and simplicity of words, I consider single words which can present full meaning within a handful of letters: love, hate, war, peace, life, and death. Words can be literal, ideological, or metaphorical. They teach us about history and to surmise about impending events. They anchor academic learning, thoughts and ideals, religious teachings, and philosophical debate. They reflect emotions, imagination, and wonder, and tell us about yearning and regret. Words tell us stories. They can show us the truth and be taken at face value in context or out of context. They can be parsed or they can be denied. Words can be lies. Words can mean everything and they can mean nothing. The intent is the starting point. The actions and reactions then follow. Words come at us now in what feels like a ceaseless river of visual and auditory information from myriad directions. Keeping up with it feels like a marathon where time is crimped by the demands of the immediacy of it all and the expectations of instant this and instant that. It has been calculated that we as individuals take on as much information in 1 year as people who lived 100 years ago took in their entire lifetime. Trying to glean meaning from this torrent of input while discerning sincerity from ill will and fact from fiction, not just to interpret the greater world around us, but to engage with our daily lives, is now a persistent task. I believe that there is duality in all that exists. In photography, it is the interplay between light and darkness, and what the photographer chooses to leave in and leave out of a composition. In life, it is death that gives us dimensions for comprehending the ephemeral passing of time. We are here to stop hate speech, but what is the converse? For me, it all starts with words and how we choose to use them. The understanding of history is not just a platform for remembering past atrocities and traumas, but it is a springboard for taking lessons learned to be used widely as guides for addressing contemporary issues. Because of the Holocaust, we are not as innocent as our forebears were, despite centuries of pogroms and forced exiles. I'm certain that before World War II, they could have never imagined a deliberate, systematic genocide of such magnitude. We tragically know that it is possible and carry the pain and the fear that it could always happen again. But this should not be our starting point. Our starting point is clearly rooted in optimism, otherwise we wouldn't be here today. Where we are also different from our forebears is we have the benefit of living during this time of immense global communication. On the positive side, we are exposed to viewpoints from individuals and cultures from around the world that offer constructive ideas and mindsets. On the negative side, we are aware to a heightened degree of the casual and deliberate cruelty, hatred, and blatant falsehoods that are all meant to provoke and arouse destructive actions. Within this abundance of interconnectedness comes the risk of intense emotions that can be infectious with very consequential reverberations. Equanimity is one of my favorite words, and it means keeping your emotions balanced. Teaching tolerance and mindful coexistence is one thing. Inspiring people to truly live them and pass them down into future generations is another. I feel that it is about striking a balance between being informative and being cautious with judgment, as there are alternative ways to mitigate behavior. When words are strung together, they take on layers of meaning and thought, sometimes pedestrian and sometimes profound. Choosing words to invoke interpretations or influence thinking and responses is a serious responsibility when the stakes are as high as they are now with the rapid escalation of anti-Semitism globally. Having faith in humanity and in oneself is to do the just and right thing and to say the right words. Borders have been shifting for as long as humans have delineated them. Averting conflict, violence, and senseless killings while advocating for amicable coexistence involves effective communication. Humans have the capacity to do great things. We've gone to the moon and to Mars. We've harnessed energy, made astonishing medical advances, and invented ways to make our lives extraordinary with an abundance of ease. Every time I get in an airplane and gaze out the window, I marvel at the perspective that I'm afforded. I can only imagine how Galileo or Leonardo da Vinci would have loved the opportunity to see our beautiful planet from 30,000 feet. In writing this presentation for this very important conference, I thought about what I want to say and what I don't want to say, as I feel that blank spaces can offer resting places for thoughts and formulations. I would like to close with a quote from the great playwright Tom Stoppard that is taken from a recent interview in the New York Times that specifically addresses the rapid rise in anti-Semitism, which we are now also seeing to a great extent in America. The interviewer asked him, quote, "So what to your mind would be the best response to anti-Semitism?" Stoppard's response, and I quote, "I have absolutely no doubt what the solution is, but it is very long-term, and it's not a solution that you can simply adopt. The solution is to develop a society in which these issues barely arise because the society is fair. In many issues, I think, God, if only we could start education again from the bottom up. Just now, begin with the next generation of 5-year-olds and teach them the philosophy of life. But the glib and undeniable answer to your question is to create a society where you don't have to deal with anti-Semitism because it's simply not part of anybody's consciousness. It's a utopian idea," end quote. Thank you.
Благодаря на госпожа Мариса Рот.
Thank you, Ms. Marisa Roth. You gave us a lot of food for thought to our minds. I have a technical announcement, and that is that the coffee break should have already started, but we've got another proposal, and that is to finish the panel discussion. We have two more speakers, very interesting ones, and then we can officially close the conference and then move on into lunch or coffee break and lunch, and then we can continue with the speakers. And now I'm pleased to give the floor to Associate Professor Eva Pushkarova, lecturer at the University of Sofia, St. Clement Ohridsky.
Здравейте, уважаеми колеги.
Thank you, colleagues. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you for postponing the pleasure to discuss the viewpoint of science and the point of view of science on this topic, today's topic. I'm a representative of the academia in Bulgaria, and I'm very sensitive to the language I use in my scientific research. Allow me in this regard to start by taking advantage that I'm among the last speakers to give you my reflection on what I've heard. My personal opinion as somebody who thinks she's a specialist in discrimination is that we should distinguish between hate speech from the other forms of discriminatory activity. In this regard, if you allow me, the Holocaust, genocide, and the other crimes, which are international crimes, which could have a discriminatory or racist element, are not discriminatory crimes in accordance with the practice of the court in The Hague. So we should distinguish them from the common discriminatory criminality. Discriminatory criminality has a sufficient number of independent elements. We heard examples today and yesterday from the Bulgarian and international practice about discriminatory activity which exceeds freedom of expression, and the European term, if you allow me, is crime with discriminatory element or with a discrimination motive, and not the hate crime. The European doctrine protects its concept as more precise as regards hatred, which is used in the other side of the pond. Hatred is a feeling, while discrimination is ethics. It's not necessary for the person who uses a discriminatory attitude to hate the person he is using them against. With these initial methodological notes, I would like to talk about the case law in Strasbourg, but not only, to talk about freedom of speech. So I would like to make a distinction between freedom of speech as a legal standard, which provides a right to express your opinions, from hate speech, and freedom of speech is a basic law. The ECHR links it with the democratic foundation of contemporary rule of law. And with your permission, I'd like to bring you back to the end of the communist era, and to urge you to remember the reason why we were fighting and probably are continuing to fight for democracy. People didn't have so much hunger for petrol or for bread, but for the freedom of expression. And we as society, emerging from the darkness of slavery, we were fighting for freedom of expression. Everything else was a consequence of this. Now we are able to do so. But what we have learned in the meantime is that not everything that you want to say can be said. It has consequences. This is a limited freedom of expression is a limited right, unlike freedom of beliefs. I can believe in whatever I like. The question is whether I can express my opinions or not. Strasbourg is not so sensitive what the content is and how the belief is expressed, as long as the belief contributes for the pluralism of different points of view in the public debate. Why is this important? Because this is how we develop, and that's why words are very important, including the words we use to describe behavior we don't like. Rather, allow me to turn to you with disagreement. The Bulgarian Penal Code does not foresee a limited protection. Sorry, let me rephrase myself. It provides full protection against all crimes with a discriminatory motive. It's a question of interpretation, and discrimination and domestic violence are different. They have common factual basis, but are two different phenomena. The practice of Strasbourg is chaotic on this fundamental human right. This practice that you can see the main standards on the screen. This case law contains different things which depend on the details in the facts. And if we use a factually simplified cases, then the standards of Strasbourg have some foreseeable logic. But if we try leaving the casuistic approach to apply a general mental framework and try to adapt it to all hypotheses of probable hate speech or discriminatory behavior, we'll see this is not possible. And the challenge here is related to the limit between the freedom of speech and hate speech. Hate speech in Bulgaria, you see the national standard for freedom of speech. It's important to quote the decision of the Constitutional Court of '96, which is remarkable because it repeats the standards of Strasbourg, which have not appeared yet, that are almost identical in the standard used by the Constitutional Court of Bulgaria. So in Bulgaria, we always consider freedom of speech, and at all geographic locations, we take it at the same time. And hate speech, understood as speech which has the potential to bring to violence, it has always been considered as falling within the scope of absolute bans. In the Bulgarian Penal Code, these are the main features, the main phenomena that we can see hate speech behind. It's a huge institute, and it is commented as parts of a crime, but outside the penal protection there are many other institutes for reaction. This is not necessary for this audience, but what you can see, just to structure our idea of what the penal code is persecuting. In conclusion, I'd like to turn your attention to the following. What we are saying affects the way we think. The way we think determines our behavior. The discriminatory motive appears in the early childhood, before our consciousness, before moral thinking arises. Discrimination is arisen in contact with the environment which is forming you. The more diverse the environment you have been formed in and raised, the more people you come in contact with, even if this contact is not favorable, even if it is not within your usual cultural family environment. the smaller the risk of you to turn into somebody thinking in standards about the others. In all honesty, in this whole, there is no person who does not discriminate somebody or something. We carry discrimination in ourselves. This is how we function socially. Discrimination is a social phenomenon. The question is to use its positive, constructive sides and to limit its harmful sides. The harmful sides are manifested when it divides people. Once we have a discriminatory motive, it can expand if it's not limited. If somebody just speaks with hate speech, and we hear that the difference between freedom of expression and hate speech is that hate speech requires you to follow what I say, while freedom of expression is something for myself only. When we require others to follow our understanding of things, then we lead to artificial division of people. And when people are artificially divided, at one point they turn against each other. This is how discriminatory behavior escalates. Much has been said today and yesterday about the escalated model of discriminatory behavior. So I'm going to limit myself to just what has been said as regards hate speech. And I'm going to finish. Speech determines how we think about the world and ourselves. The more positive this speech is, the more it engages just us, the more we are able to carry responsibility for what we are saying and to connect to others through our thoughts. Thank you.
Благодаря на доцент Пушкарова.
Thank you, Associate Professor Pushkarova, for your presentation and for drawing our attention to something indeed important, and that's the difference between what our beliefs are and what we express as words or gestures. I have a question to you. Do we learn from the lessons of history? Professor Lilkov, you well, we heard about the photographs of peace, not of war, by Ms. Marisa Rod. And the debates you, Associate Professor Pushkarova and Professor Lilkov entered into. So do we learn from history? Are you pessimists or optimists? Thank you. I would say that we first need to know history in order to learn from history. Unfortunately, we know very little about the Second World War, the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews. So that's the key. We have to start telling, give good examples, tell about the good examples, because what happened in Bulgaria, it did not appear when the law on the protection of the nation was adopted. But the rescue was due to the friendship, to the good neighborly relations. And that's why we have this quote that Bulgarians who lived with Armenians, Turks, Greeks, they have no reasons to hate Jews either. So we have to start with the upbringing, which starts at home and then continues at school, sometimes throughout one's whole life. Ms. Roth?
Yes, I would say, sorry, let me take this off. I would say I'm an eternal optimist, despite everything I've seen and witnessed and the inheritance of sorrow in my family. We have all, if we think about technology, we've all learned how to use our phones and create PDFs, and everybody now has this facility to do that. I mean, when we're children, we learn how to count to 10, and then 20, and then 1,000. So I think it's a willfulness to learn. So I do believe that we can learn about how to change behavior. Again, it is about education. It's about offering alternative paths to thought and coexistence. So that's why we're all here. I think we must all be optimists.
Thank you. Are you an optimist, Associate Professor Pushkarova? Do we learn from history? And will the future be better than the present or the past? Well, we always learn from history. We don't learn from anywhere else. So, of course, we learn from history. Well, with regard whether the future is better, it's always better. This is an optimistic ending of this panel. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite our last speaker. This is, for today, this is Associate Professor Rumiana Christidi, a lecturer at the University of Sofia. You have the floor. Thank you. Honorable Mr. Geshev, honorable representatives of the Prosecutor's Office of Bulgaria, foreign lawyers, guests, colleagues, like-minded supporters, ladies and gentlemen, I'm privileged to say a few closing words. After I listened very carefully to all statements today and yesterday, and I'd like to congratulate the organizers for this conference. And we organize at the university very often conferences on the Holocaust, on anti-Semitism, but they are more like academic, closed academic events. And for the first time, in a Bulgarian institution with a very high credibility, this is the Prosecutor's Office, managed to organize such an event with very strong 3 panels. Panel with the religious leaders from different religious communities, panel with very high professionals, lawyers from different European countries, and I'd like to thank them for their attendance and for their experience they shared, and the civil panel with very diverse professionals from various areas. What I was mostly impressed with was the common things that we've got together and how each one of us works on the same issues. We are encountering the same challenges, but it's the first time that we're together, however, and we can share our own perspectives, and this is the most valuable asset of this conference. And it's important to not to leave it as a single event, but this should become a priority of the Bulgarian institutions, and it should be regular. And at the university, we are, well, a priori committed to this. I'm here as a historian, as a leader of the Jewish Studies program, the only one in Bulgaria. And I would like to say a few words about education. Well, very little was known about the Holocaust, about the Jews, the discrimination. Almost very little was taught at schools. Only recently this topic was touched upon in school books. Same thing at the universities. The only major that the only program that we had was the Jewish studies. And my course is called Anti-Semitism and Holocaust. And I should say that students are very interested in this course. And not only students who signed up for this program, but also from other programs, lawyers, historians, and others, because they want to learn something more. And I am surprised to see that they are surprised to learn that the Holocaust is not just the physical destruction. This is the final stage. The whole thing started back in 1933 with the slogans. Jews are our misfortune. So this is hate speech, and this escalated in anti-Jewish legislation. And it is only the final stage that was the physical extermination. So sometimes words preempt intentions, and they can lead to more cruel intentions than initially planned. But do we learn from history? No, we don't learn from history, because in life we repeat the same mistakes all over again. Now, so this is human nature. We will not overcome or stop hate speech, because this is part of humanity, of the long history of humanity. But what we can do is to keep the balance that makes us stay on the bright side. Otherwise, hate will destroy us, and hate speech is most intense against people for religious reasons, because this evokes negative images that have been instilled for centuries about the Jews and other ethnic and minority groups, and this incites violence. So I do not want to take more of your time as a lecturer, as a like-minded colleague of all who I met here. I wish that this conference would set the beginning of even more fruitful results in the fight against evil. Thank you very much. Thank you for this concluding statement, Associate Professor Christidi. I'd like to thank all the participants in this two-day conference, and especially the participants in today's panels. Was pleased to be your host, and I will finish off with a quote, and I will quote something that I heard in the discussions over these 2 days, something that will stay with me, and I hope it will stay with you too. So we need to know well good practices and the good case law of the ECHR. There's a need of legislative changes in Bulgaria. Now, key cases should be flagged as symbols in the fight of hate speech, against hate speech. There should be training materials for experts. There should be commitment and consistency in fulfilling the commitments we have and the priorities we have. Enhancing the qualification of all experts involved. Enhance sensitivity of society. Building partnerships and giving a platform for expression of genuine, authentic speakers. The leaders, the politicians, their role, joint fight, tolerance campaigns, the role of the family, the rules we have at home, the role of education, the role of the media, the images they build, the importance of words, the need to know each other better, to smile more often, consistency, values, partnerships, acceptance, creating a society where hate is not on the agenda, love. These are the words and phrases that will stay with me. Thank you for being part of this discussion, and thank you. And I hope that beyond the walls of this beautiful building, we will continue working towards the world we want to build together. And now I would like to give the floor to the Prosecutor General of the Republic of Bulgaria, our host, Mr. Ivan Geshev.
Honestly, for the 3 years that I've been Prosecutor General, it has not been so hard to me to formulate what I'm thinking now. After this conference, I can say that it has surpassed all my previous expectations. I can sincerely say that after this conference, having listened to the speakers, I have found inside me some prejudgments which were dealt with after I spoke to you, after I saw you. I no longer have them. After we discussed the hate speech from all aspects, another thing which is very important for me as a Prosecutor General, for whom I can say that this is a topical issue, and by the way, it's a topical issue not only for the reasons discussed yesterday and today, the different aspects of hate, the different aspects of crimes with a discriminatory motive. It's a problem because for us as a nation, we ourselves hate each other on a daily basis, and I can see this process deepening every year, and it cannot but lead to all the consequences we have seen historically. We have discussed all the problems that are an issue for the European society, but also our society. So we have an issue in our society as well. As Bulgarian citizens, we have a problem with hate and prejudice, which we have for each other. And we use hate speech every day, even without knowing it, as one of the previous speakers said, and thus increase it and create the dangers that were discussed. We intensify these potential dangers. And I will say that this format of yesterday and today, for me, as the previous speakers said, needs to continue, because it opens up opportunities. There were people present at this conference who are experts in their field, who can change this balance that Madam Christiri talked about. These are spiritual leaders, NGOs, the magistrates. Separately, the results won't be the same as it would be if we join hands, each working in their own field. So I'm going to reiterate, in this format, working in this format, we have windows of opportunity. Whether we will implement what is possible to reduce the intensity of hate speech, to have more good, to have a better society, it's up to us. Thank you.
Пожелавам всички здраве и надеждата, че ще се виждаме пак. Защото да надяваме.
I wish you to stay healthy and I hope to see you again. For me, this is not yet another conference because it is different. It is different in terms of speakers, but also as a feeling, as emotion. So I truly hope we will continue together to overcome all the hardships